All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Commercial milk and modern Jewish identity. All right, that's the very ambitious topic. This is, but I think I'll try to live up to the ambition of the title. Just first, as background, let's go back to the first source, which is a Talmudic source, and sort of just get the background for this modern discussion. So the first half of source 1 is the Mishnah, actually. So an early source. The Mishnah says, "Elu dvarim shel ovdei kochavim asurin ve'ein isuran isur hana'ah." There are a whole variety of things concerning Gentiles that are prohibited to eat, but there's no isur hana'ah, there's no benefit prohibition. It's merely an eating prohibition, right? And this is in a series of Mishnayot, a section of the Mishnah that concerns our tractate of the Mishnah that is all about our interaction with Gentiles, trying to figure out how we can, how do we get on as a Jewish minority in a non-Jewish world while preserving our distinct worldview and also preserving our distinct peoplehood, right? It seems some of these rules are about maintaining some sort of social distinction, right, as a barrier against intermarriage. That seems to be one agenda here. So what are they? Chalav shechavo aved kochavim ve'en Yisrael ro'ehu. Milk that was milked by a Gentile and there was no Jew watching him. V'hapat v'hashemen shelahen. And also bread and oil of them, right? Their oil, like bread that was baked by a Gentile, oil that was pressed by a Gentile. Rabbi ubeiti no hatiru hashemen. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the prince and his Beitin, they undid this rabbinic decree against Gentile bread, okay, which is its other very interesting Talmudic discussion, why and how he was able to do that, but he did. And now we are able to, what?
Oil.
Sorry, oil, thank you. Good, oil. The bread is another topic, right? Bread is another topic altogether, but the oils, right? So we are allowed to eat and consume oil that Gentiles have pressed. And this is, you can go out and you can buy oil that has been pressed by Gentiles to this very day. You can do so. And if it's extra virgin olive oil, it does not require kashrut supervision either, okay? There you are, see? Worth the price of admission already. Okay. V'hashilakot, and also boiled things, and v'kvashin shedarchan latet l'tochan yayin v'chometz, v'tzirat trufa v'tzir she'ein ba daga klavit shetetit bo v'achiluk v'koret shel chaltit. There's all types of foods, not all of which I'm entirely sure what they are. There seems to be, there might be non-kosher fishes mixed in, there might be wines in certain curing liquids, like your pickling liquids, which might have wine or vinegars in them that are derived from wines. Hare elu asurin ve'ein yisuran isur hana. All of these things, they're prohibited, but there's no isur hana. There's no benefit prohibition, which means you can sell it, you can trade it, you can derive benefit from it, just can't eat it, okay? The Gemara then comments on this Mishnah. The Gemara actually goes through all of these categories and discusses. So, chalav, lamai, nichushla. What's the concern with milk? What do you have to be afraid of when it comes to consuming Gentile milk? Imisham, ichlufei, tahor, chiver, tamei yarok. If you're worried that he's switching the milk with non-kosher milk, right? He's switching, camel milk or something for your cow's milk. But that's easy because kosher milk is white and non-kosher milk is yarok, which is maybe green or maybe yellow in Talmudic, right? Hebrew yellow. Okay. So you would be able to tell. So that can't be the concern, right? You should be able to buy any milk. If it looks white, you know it's from a kosher animal. Imishum iraruve. If it's because of a mixture, what if he just mixed in some non-kosher milk? He adulterated his kosher milk with non-kosher milk, so it still looks white, but it's substantially non-kosher in its origin. What about the white test? The color test won't work. Nikum, all you have to do is take that milk and turn it into cheese. Okay. As the master has taught us, chalav tahor omed, chalav tameh eno omed. We have a rule that milk from kosher animals you can make cheese out of. Milk that's not kosher you can't make cheese out of. This rule actually, I believe, is true. Right? I don't think you can make cheese out of the milk of a non-kosher animal. Right? If you think of cheese, there's goat cheese, and there's sheep cheese, and there's cow milk cheese. I don't think you can make cheese out of camel milk or horse milk, right? Okay, so think about that, okay? So it seems to be true. And now you have a perfect test. All you have to do is take your milk, turn it into cheese, and then you know that it's from a kosher source if it solidifies into cheese. Okay, so if you want to take your cheese and make it into, if you want to take the milk and make it into cheese, inachinami, great, you have a solution, that's fine. So you can use any milk for making cheese, there's no concern, and everything is fine. But if you want the milk for kimcha, which is a non-cheese, I think some sort of substance made from liquid, milk that was still liquid, I don't know exactly what, a dairy dish, then you have a problem. V'nishkol minei kali v'nikum. Why don't you just take like a sample, like a little biopsy of the milk and turn it into cheese, and if it works, then you know, and if it doesn't work, then you're in trouble. Kevan de betahor nami ika nisyube de lo kaime leik lemekam aladimota. Because even with kosher milk, not all of it solidifies into cheese. Some of it you have like sort of little liquid residue that remain in the midst of the cheese, so this is not an accurate method of verifying, to take a tiny sample. It's not going to be very effective. And if you want to say, well, actually, even if you want to take this milk and make it into cheese, there'll still be little drops of moisture that will be left behind, and so even that mechanism won't verify that the milk was from a kosher source. Hence, the rule is you can only consume milk that you may not consume milk that was milked by a Gentile without a Jew watching. Okay? A Jew watching, by the way, is pretty, what is it meant? So, and this is the standard halacha, this is basic halacha, from this Mishnah to the Gemara's discussion to the code books. Milk has to be milked by a Jew, or if a Gentile does the milking, a Jew has to watch him do the milking. Watching doesn't necessarily mean like in the room with him, but you're sitting outside, you see nothing goes in, nothing goes out, but you're sitting there during the milking process. We had a student, on campus who converted to Judaism and then went to spend the summer with his parents who lived in Qatar, and needless to say, it was hard to find many kosher products there, but his grandfather owned a farm, and he wanted to know if he had to milk and in Qatar there is camel milk is like consumed there, so you do have to be careful. And some of the leniencies that we will discuss don't apply there. So he wanted to know if he had to milk the cows himself, or if he could just watch it being done. And in fact, that is sufficient to watch it being done. This is clear from this case here. Okay, that's how things were. Jump ahead a few thousand years, and now we have Tshuva of Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein died in the 1980s, born in Russia, and the early stage of his career were in Soviet Russia actually, but he came to America, I guess I don't remember when he came to America actually, but by the 1950s, he was the predominant halachic authority in America, and he remained the predominant halachic authority in America for until his death in the 1980s. This tshuva from 1954, so he was already the predominant posek of the United States, and perhaps anywhere in the world in that time. I think in Israel maybe he was less influential, maybe he remains less influential in Israel, but if there are if there are Jews 1,000 years from now, they will be reading the Shuvot of Moshe Feinstein, and there are very few people that you could say that with equal confidence. And something else about just to say another thing about Rav Moshe Feinstein, and his Shuvot, that there are certain. There's a scholar. Somebody once said to me, to a class that he was teaching that with certain tshuvot, you have the sense that if you had a year to like research the topic, you could have written that tshuva, because it's just a collection of, Ravazi Yosef was the person who said this about, whose tshuvot were very encyclopedic, and they're written in a style that you kind of feel that, okay, if I had a year, and I should read everything written on this topic, I could also write a tshuva like this. Rav Moshe Feinstein, really unlike that, because you could read everything that's been written on the topic, and then you come to his tshuva, and he tells you that there's a source that you never thought was relevant to this subject, and he uses it to completely revolutionize the way we understand this topic. And you see that a little bit actually in this tshuva as well. Okay, so he was featured last week in our class, and he's featured again this week. Anyway, Tedvav Sivan Tafshin Yudalit, so the 15th of Sivan, 5/7/14, 1954, Malach Vodo Yedidi Haravagon Reino Rav Yehuda Dik Shlita. Okay, it's a letter to a certain rabbi. B'davar Chalav Shel HaCompanies B'Medinatenu Asher Yesh Pikuach HaMemshala V'im Yaravu Chalav Behemat Meya Yanshu V'gam Yasgiru Et HaEsek Shelehem Shulchan Vadai Mirtate Milarev Yesh Tam Gadol Lehatir Af Below Shitat HaPrichadash Mishum Da'ikar Diyadia Berurahu Kariya Mamash Kahad Shvuot Daf HaMadal Gam Le'edut HaMdamam. Okay, the milk's sold by companies here in our country. They have government inspections. If they mix the milk with that of a non-kosher animal, they'll be punished, their business will be closed, and therefore they certainly are afraid to mix. This is a great rationale to permit this milk, any commercial milk, even without the position of Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash is a I think 17th century source, and he has a different rationale for permitting milk that didn't have a Jew watching it being milked. But even without going to that rationale, we have a reason to be lenient here in America, because the government is watching, and all the companies know that if they adulterate their milk, they'll be punished, their business will be closed. For the principle is that full knowledge is like actual seeing. Right? What was the language of the Mishnah? Chalav, shachavo evet kochavim ve'ein yisrael ro'ehu. Milk that was milked by a Gentile without a Jew watching the milking process. Ro'eh, you have to see it happening. And Rav Moshe is telling us, well, actually, in Jewish law, knowledge is seeing. Right? We say in English, seeing is believing. So in halacha, it's believing is seeing. Okay? Or if you know, it's not believing. If you know something to be true, it's as though you see it. You don't actually have to, therefore, see it. And this is discussed in Masechet Shavuot, regarding testimony about money, and it's even stronger in Tosfot and Yevamot, in the name of those are the commentators, regarding the court's knowledge of a convert's mikveh immersion. It's actually a very topical conversation. There's been a lot of discussion about, in the last few months, about where the Beit stands and what the court sees when a female convert immerses in the mikveh. What if they, do they have to see her immersing? Right? Obviously, she has no clothes on usually, or she has very little clothing on. She maybe has a loose sheet for modesty's sake, but it's still, for most women, very uncomfortable to be otherwise, not fully dressed in the proximity of three rabbis in this conversion situation. So maybe there is a halachic discussion about perhaps they don't actually have to be in the room, perhaps they don't even have to see. And the rationale for permitting, Tosfot in particular are open to this position, is that knowledge is the same as seeing, right? So normally the Beit Din has to witness the immersion in the mikveh, but if they are in the hallway and the woman goes in to convert and they hear a splash and she comes out 30 seconds later and her hair is wet, so she went to the mikveh, that's what happened. And you know that. And if you know that, maybe that's the same as seeing. And this is the definition of we assert. This is what's meant by Anan Sahadi. Anan Sahadi is in Aramaic, we testify, we assert that we find in many places in the Talmud it's sort of like a knowledge of the world that allows us to say something is true without literally witnessing it with our eyes. And even the certifying witnesses at a wedding who see only yichud, it's as though they saw sexual relations itself, and the bride therefore acquires the full legal status of a married woman, to the extent that an adulterer is executed, another man's kedushin cannot have any effect upon her, right? There's all sorts of halachic ramifications of sexual intercourse, none of which require witnesses for, you should, in most situations, circumstances, you would imagine you wouldn't actually have witnesses, but at weddings we have Eidei Yichud, have witnesses to Yichud, right? They're not, they're just seeing seclusion, okay, and that's sufficient. You have, okay, and even stronger. Then that example, we find that Anan Sahadi is used in an even weaker way in our reliance on the principle that a man will not turn his marital sexual intercourse into acts of zanut, and rely on that as a full piece of evidence and trust those witnesses who saw yichud, even for lenient ramifications, such as not requiring a get from the second husband of a minor betrothed by relative other than her father, who never objected and who subsequently reached maturity and tried to marry another. Okay, that's a complicated case. Let's work through it and unpack it, okay, what he's saying. Ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. Okay, let's back up. Okay, first, Kiddushin is betrothal, okay? It's the first stage of marriage, and it's marriage for everything except for you're not actually living together as husband and wife. You stay in your separate households, but otherwise you're married, which means that if you want to marry someone else, you need to go through a divorce ceremony. So that's pretty married, right? Except after Kiddushin, traditionally, husband-to-be and wife-to-be lived in their separate homes until they got their household ready, and then they would move in together, and then they'd be fully married. Today, we do both of these stages of the wedding, of marriage, under the chuppah, one right after the other. So they're sort of not separated anymore. One of the methods of Kiddushin is sexual intercourse, where the bride and groom have intention that this sexual intercourse will be for the purposes of entering into this state of Kiddushin. So that, as opposed to their intention is, non-marital sex, but if the intention is, no, we want to, by this union, become married, then they are. Okay? And that's one of the methods of Kiddushin. We don't do that. We give a ring, and that's, but by its essence, still sexual intercourse with this intention is a method of entering into Kiddushin. When would this pertain? This would pertain in a case where there maybe was no Kiddushin, no ritual Kiddushin with a ring, with witnesses and an officiating rabbi, but there was a couple that lived together as husband and wife over a period of years, and everyone knew that. Everyone saw them living together in Yichud, and we might be able to say, so even though nobody actually saw that they had sex, but we know about people and human psychology that nobody would ever turn his sexual relationship into a promiscuous one. And so certainly, if a couple is living together as husband and wife, their intention is to be married. And that's an anan sahadi. Ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. If he has the option of a sexual relationship with his wife in the context of marriage, he wouldn't have the couple wouldn't go through that process with the intention of, we're not married. Okay? And therefore, we assume that they are married. Now, as a aside, this raises a whole question: what about the halachic status of civil marriages? And Rav Moshe and elsewhere will say, well, actually, because now in the modern world there's this concept of living together, so in fact this anan sahadi maybe doesn't apply anymore. Maybe the fact that there is this thing we call living together, maybe that means no, there are people who actually prefer to have a sexual relationship and let it be classified halachically as zanut, as non-marital sexual intimacy. So such a thing does exist now, but in the time of the Talmud there was this clear assumption that nobody would do such a thing. Okay, if they had the option of turning that sexual relationship into a legitimate marital sexual relationship. So where does this get interesting? What about a case of a woman who was betrothed as a minor? So the Torah allows fathers to betroth their minor daughters in marriage, right? Kiddushin, this first stage of marriage, a father can do this on behalf of his daughter, and she's fully married to whomever it is that the father enters into Kiddushin with. It's a lot of background, but I think hopefully we'll get to the point. That's a right the father has. The Talmud actually says you shouldn't do this. It's a bad idea. You should wait till your daughter grows up and can identify who she wants to marry and let her marry him herself as an adult. Don't do this as children. Tosafot actually say, well, actually, in our times it's really a good idea because if there's a good guy, you might not meet another one, and better like seal the deal now when they're both young and they're both willing, or the families are willing, just do it now, right? Tosfot, this is Tosfot Masechet Kiddushin. This is one of the pieces of evidence for historians who suggest that this particular collection of Tosfot emerged from a location, region, and time period in France where Jewish communities were very, very small. You also find Tosfot writing about there's no minyan, so maybe if a child carrying a chumash, maybe that counts, right? So that suggests very, very small Jewish communities, right? You marry off your minor daughter, you don't have a minyan that's reliable that lives in your town necessarily, so small communities, eligible, kids, let's do the marriage now. In any event, fathers have that right to marry off their daughters while they are in ancient times. Okay, this is not done anymore. There was a case recently of a father who tried to do this to his daughter in the context of a very bitter divorce dispute with his wife. He betrothed their daughter to a man, meaning he accepted the ring from the man. I mean, that's how it works. The man gives the father the ring, the father accepts the ring, and the daughter is married to the man who gave the ring. So the father accepted Kiddushin from some man on behalf of his minor daughter, and said he would tell who this man was, who his daughter's husband was, only on condition that some, divorce, financial arrangement was to his benefit. So he would get the house, or he would get a lot of money, or whatever it was. So he tried to blackmail his wife, by basically with his daughter's life. The response from the rabbinic community was to declare that any witness who would be party to such a ceremony, such a sadistic ceremony, was, by virtue of participating in the ceremony, was a wicked, sadistic person who was therefore invalid as a witness, and the Kiddushin did not pertain. So his daughter was free, and this little tact didn't work. So you can no longer marry your minor daughter. But essentially, by Torah law, a father can. If the father is dead, the girls, the young girl, the minor girls, other relatives can do this as well, midrabanan, okay, as a rabbinic marriage. Okay? So the mother, the siblings, they can marry off their minor daughter rabbinically, and this girl becomes biblically married to this husband when she matures and stays with him as his wife. Okay? Again, can you imagine in an ancient context where the poverty the family could be thrown into if the breadwinner dies and they have to provide for everyone? So you have a young daughter, so you marry her off to someone who will take care of her. Eventually she'll grow up and she'll be his wife. This is what was done. So she's married to him rabbinically as a child because it wasn't her father who accepted the Kiddushin. Once she grows up and she stays married with him, she becomes biblically married. As they have a sexual relationship as adults, then she is biblically married to him. Because if they have a sexual relationship, we know, Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilatzut, surely when they're having a sexual relationship, the intention is that they should be married. Anan Sahadi, we testify to that. That's human psychology. No one would live as husband and wife and not want to be legitimately married to his wife. So surely they had that intention. How certain are we? What if another man goes up to her and gives her a ring and says, Haret Mikudeshli, and wants to betroth her, the second husband? So if you go up to a married woman and give her a ring and say, Haret Mikudeshli, and she takes it, no matter how much she wants to be married to that second man, she's not. Right? A woman cannot be married to two husbands. Okay? So a woman who's married, a second man, a third man, you can give her rings all day long, she's not married to anyone other than the first original husband. So this woman as well, there was nobody ever gave her a ring in front of witnesses, ever, except for, right, biblically, right? Her mother accepted money from her husband when she was a little girl. That's only a rabbinic marriage. She grows up, and someone else gives her a ring and tries to betroth her. She's not married to that second husband. There's no need for a get, no need for divorce from that second husband. There's just no marriage whatsoever to that second husband because her marriage to her first husband is a full, valid biblical marriage. Why is that? Only because, what do we have witnesses to? What do we see? What do we know? We have witnesses that they're living together. That's it. I mean, the witnesses don't know that they're having a sexual relationship. The witnesses just know that Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz live together on 321 Main Street. That's all the witnesses see. But because the witnesses see that they're living together as husband and wife, they see yichud, they see they're secluded together in the same house, and because we know about human psychology, Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilatzut, that's enough knowledge to say this couple is fully biblically married, no one else can marry her at all. So he's putting together a very, very strong case to say that we can know things with certainty and that our knowledge, just our knowledge of like circumstances, our knowledge of society and psychology and how people act with each other in society is the same as though like two kosher witnesses at a wedding see the groom give the ring to the bride. Right? Think that you're at a wedding, everyone's like, the witnesses come up, they look at the ring, they examine the ring, they see, right? All that. So that's that's riyah, that's sight, that's testimony. And equivalent to that is our knowledge of society and psychology and how people interact. That's what he's saying right here. Okay? Anan Sahadi, our testimony about the way the world works, that's the same as seeing something.
Can a man at this time marry two women?
Man, this time could marry two women, yes. Oh, at the time of the Talmud, absolutely, yes. Not 1954, but in the time of the Talmud. Okay. Yeah. Yes. And Shmuel does not argue on any grounds other than because he maintains that people do not know that the marriage of a minor does not have legal force, and so his sexual relations are relying upon the initial kiddushin when his wife was still a minor, even though the assumption that a man will not turn marital sexual intercourses into znut is certainly only true about a majority, and nonetheless this knowledge is considered to be foolproof. And even though this is combined with the witnesses only seeing yichud, and for Rav there's a third reliance on the majority, for Rav it's retained that the majority of men do know that the betrothal of a minor by someone other than her father has no force. So in the Talmudic discussion of that case, there's a dispute, but Moshe is saying that dispute is based on Shmuel claiming that most people don't know that the marriage wasn't biblically intact when the girl was a minor, and therefore during their first stages of their sexual life together as adults, they didn't have any intention to become married through their sexual relationship, and therefore they're never married biblically because they didn't have that intention. Rav, who says no, they are married biblically, he says because most people know that you can't marry off your minor daughter, right? If a non-father marries off a minor daughter, she isn't biblically married, and most people know that. And so Moshe is saying, actually, this strengthens my argument, because now we have three assumptions about the world, neither of which are going to be 110% true. They're going to be mostly true, and that's enough for this extreme case of saying, yeah, she's not married to the second guy, no need to even give a get just to be cautious. Right? Most people know that the minor girl isn't fully married. Most people don't want to turn their sexual relationships into znut, into non-marital sexuality, and most people who are living together, we presume, as husband and wife, we presume they have a sexual relationship. Those are three cases, neither of which is 100% true, but the three of them, and when you have three things mathematically, right, the doubt increases at each stage, right? So if right? You're getting nods. Good. So nonetheless, it's true enough for this really extreme case of Jewish law. And so, according to the majority that knows that the betrothal of a minor has no legal force, and according to the majority that does not turn marital sexual intercourse into znut, and the majority that you could imply sex as well, even if there are three minorities against them, and even if one of those minorities would prevent kiddushin, nonetheless, Rav thinks these witnesses, the witnesses that they live together, are sufficient to establish that sexual intercourse took place for the sake of kiddushin, even with a lenient ramification, such that the kiddushin of another has no force. And Shmuel agrees to the essence of the rule that abstract knowledge is a form of evidence. Abstract knowledge. So you see how this is going to be relevant. He's going to give another case though before he's not going to come back to him quite yet. And abstract knowledge can also be considered evidence in capital cases for witnesses to the capital crime of adultery who see circumstantial evidence of adultery but do not actually see the eyeliner applicator in a tube. Okay, they don't actually see the eyeliner applicator going in the tube. They just see circumstantial evidence, and nonetheless that is sufficient for the capital offense in biblical law of adultery. Therefore, we must conclude the essential law is that knowledge is just like witnessing something, even regarding capital cases, and so we execute adulterers, and it is an exception to our normal rule to require eyewitnesses to punish other criminals. Right? So that's another. If it's true that circumstantial evidence is enough to punish adulterers, why don't we allow that for other crimes? So, good question, he says. But our essential rule is that abstract knowledge is sufficient. But since adultery could not be punished if we required eyewitnesses, we find Shmuel suggesting in the first chapter of Makot that we can punish adulterers without actual sight, which he could only have suggested in this way if the essential law were that we can rely upon knowledge as though it were something seen. You couldn't make an exception to kill somebody for a crime if that wasn't essentially what the law allowed us as our evidentiary standard didn't permit that. Everyone holding so far? You see this is going to get to milk? Okay. Therefore, regarding milk, which is only prohibited if a Gentile milked and there was no Jew watching, it can be permitted also if a Jew knows fully that the milk is pure, for knowing is like seeing. Okay? You don't have to see the milking being done if you know that the milk is pure. And such is the case. If the milk company was to adulterate the milk, they would be punished and be required to close the factory, which would be a loss of many thousands of dollars. And the government supervision is certainly a clear knowledge, which is like seeing directly, and there is nothing prohibited in the milk. Get what he's saying? He's not saying we can be lenient in the requirement for Chalav Yisrael. He's not saying we don't need to have a Jew witnessing the milking being done. He's saying in America, a Jew is witnessing all the milking that's being done because we all know that the milk is pure because of the government supervision. Understand that? Right? He's not saying, right? You could make an argument and say, nobody drinks horse milk in America. There is no horse milk commercially sold. And so we don't have to be concerned anymore about this antiquated, issue that the Mishnah relates. You could say that. He doesn't say that. He says, knowledge is like seeing. All the milk is Chalav Yisrael. It is Chalav Yisrael milk because a Jew saw the milking being done. How did a Jew see the milking being done? Because we all know that the milk is pure. Well, how do we know the milk is pure? Because the government has intervened. We have the FDA, the Pure Food and Drug Act, and we have inspections of, random inspections of dairies, and this is the way things are here in America. And this is according to all, what?
Sorry, it seems like he is being lenient, but he's describing it in a way that makes it sound like he's not being lenient.
He's being lenient, but describing in a way that's making it sound like he's not being lenient.
Like you could, in that last statement of the argument, you could insert anything, like not just that the government watches, therefore we know. You could say, nobody drinks camel milk now, so therefore we know.
Nobody drinks camel milk, therefore we know there is no camel milk sold in America. Would that be enough for the knowledge? It seems maybe that would be enough. I think it sort of added strength by saying, and no one would dare violate the rule of the government and kind of risk their business by sort of trying to sneak around government supervision. I think that's also part of his argument as well. It seems important to me, right, in terms of the strength of this knowledge we have. Who would do such a thing? That's preposterous. Because drinking camel milk, some people somewhere in the world drink camel milk, so maybe somebody will try to do that here too. Who knows? But the fact that but no one would dare sell camel milk as cow's milk in America because we have government inspectors that would prevent that. Yes.
Yeah, but we're getting food now from China, and they adulterate
food now from China. Good.
And they adulterate their food, and I wouldn't buy any milk from China.
So let me say this. This is why the second half. Okay, modern Jewish identity, American Jewish experience. Okay, what's going on here? So when you read these lines, and we'll finish the tshuva, and we'll see the next one as well. If it was a soundtrack, to this tshuva, it would be you sort of have, you'd imagine stirring violin music and patriotic, melodies and Dwight Eisenhower in the White House and this is the era, so I've been told, of this is big trust in big institutions, right? This is the McCarthy. That's true. That's true. But overall, I think there's surveys that back this up. That's true. All the same, in general in America at this time, I think there was more so than a generation earlier, and certainly more so than today, a sense that big institutions were trustworthy, whether it was the government or the church or unions, right? People were part of big thing, or the army, right? These were big institutions. IBM, right? They were the big organizations that you worked for, that kept you safe, that were, your whole, right, you got your first job, at a corporate job, and you were there for your, 30-year career. At the end, you got a watch, a Rolex when you retired, and, and you had your Social Security check to rely on, and, right, the federal, just won the war and everything, there was a sense of solidarity, a sense that big institutions were trustworthy, and I think that, to me, that's sort of like, this entire truth is like dripping with that sense that, like, there's government inspections, nobody is going to do something, that goes against what the government tells you in terms of, like, food purity. And when I've taught this tshuva with, like, people my generation, younger than I am, and there's a much more cynical attitude, let's say, about corporation in the wake of Enron and right, who has faith anymore in corporations? Do they all, to be honest, to act with integrity, not to be reckless in breaking rules for short-term profits? No one has that kind of faith in corporations anymore, and people don't have faith in government, right? So the government has, people, I don't think the sense that, this government rules against that and they have, inspectors, that also doesn't give people necessarily that same sense of confidence, of ironclad confidence that nothing is being done. So this tshuva, I think it speaks to a really interesting moment in American history where, like, we had faith in big institutions, both in the private sector and the public sector, faith in big institutions, and we see how that, like, kind of animates this halachic response where, like, we can have faith in these big institutions, the corporation that sells us milk, and the government that sets standards and inspects that milk, and therefore we can drink this milk even without Chalav Yisrael certification. Yes?
The times now, a similar argument in favor of it is that our cynicism about corporations and the bottom line and selective breeding and the cow being probably because of selective breeding being like the animal that will produce cheap milk far more cheaply than any other animal.
So you could make it on Sahadi, right? They're all the dairy companies are greedy bastards, but therefore we know they're only going to use cow's milk because that's how you can, abuse an animal to give you the most milk is to pump a cow full of hormones, and that's the cheapest way. You can make it's a darker argument. Although I will say, maybe this is I'm going to say it later, but I'll say now there's another problem, a new problem with maybe this is okay. I should have put some. Okay, next time I teach this, I'll put it on the source sheet because it's like the next stage in terms of like what it means to like modern Jewish identity, and the American experience. If the 50s were the era of big government, now we have like the era of sort of environmental sensitivity and awareness. So you have a concern. What happened? Nixon, when did I talked about this in some other context? I forget what it was, but Nixon sold off our granary, right? We used to have price support. From the time of President Roosevelt, they had price supports to support farmers if grain prices went down. So the government would buy surplus grain if the price was too low, and then they would keep it in storage. And if the price went too high, the government would sell the grain, and that would put the prices down. And this way, there was a stable price of grain, and farmers could count on not going bust, and consumers could have grain at an affordable price. Nixon sold off I spoke about this in the context of maybe Chadash, because it's also relevant for that. So he sold off our federal grain supply, sold it to the Soviets actually, who then I think sold it back to us on the world market and made a quick little profit, which was maybe the signal of the death knell of communism. But the system that Nixon replaced this price support system was a system where the government would identify a price that it thought was the right price for the grain, and if the market price dropped below that price, the government would just pay the farmers directly the difference between that price. So instead of buying grain and then selling it as a way to keep the price stable, the government would just guarantee a certain price for grain, and if the market rate went below that, the government would just pay farmers the difference. This was supposed to be like a more, free market way perhaps of doing things. The effect, though, of this shift is that now farmers have an incentive just to produce as much grain as they possibly can because they're guaranteed, no matter what, a certain price for it. and the effect is massive amounts of grain, and the market rate then for the consumers is then very, very, very low, because the government's just paying the difference to the farmers, but the consumers get the benefit of this very, very, very low price of certain commodity grains and soybeans. The beneficiaries of all this are the big, corporations that use like corn and soybeans to make like industrial food. And so as a result of this shift, this is when farm animals moved indoors, these giant, confined animal feeding operations. This is when cows stopped eating grass in America and started eating corn. Now, when cows, were made, God made cows to eat grass. If you feed a cow a corn-based diet, it's not so healthy. It can't live for all that long on a corn. It gets fat very quickly and you can kill it for beef. But if you're trying to sustain a cow on corn, it's not so healthy. And they get sometimes this condition called, I think it's called left abomasum displacement syndrome. They get sort of gassy in one of their stomachs. And if it's a milk cow, its milk production will go down. The way to treat this condition is to take a needle and to puncture the abomasum of the cow and to kind of push out the gas built up in the cow, and the cow gets better and goes on to eat and is fine. However, doing so, puncturing the abomasum of a cow renders the cow a treifa, and the cow is then treif, and the milk is then treif, and there is a new kind of sensitivity and perhaps a new call for maybe being careful once again for only having Chalav Yisrael milk, because some argue that massive percentages, significant percentage, meaningful percentages of the dairy herd in America are actually treifas, because from this unhealthy diet they have contracted this condition, which is often treated through a procedure that renders them a treifa. There's a lot of halachic literature about this. The big kashrut agencies continue to endorse normal milk without special Chalav Yisrael certification, but there are some who are now sensitive because of this concern.
So why does it make a treif?
A treif animal is an animal that has that has certain blemishes or signs of unhealth that were presumed to be fatal within 1 year, and that's why so even an animal that was shechted in a kosher way, if upon following the slaughter you open the animal and you find that it has certain blemishes, that adhesion on the lung is the most common example, you would say, the animal would have died, it wasn't healthy, this animal is a treifa. And milk from a treifa is also a treif. So if you were to kill an animal and discover it's a treifa, so therefore, so this is, this is also probably chickens. If chickens are abused before they're slaughtered, they could be treifas, and sometimes you find, there's a Rabbi Loiki, who's the bird expert at the OU, he's found kosher, chicken sold as kosher in supermarkets that he's been able to see, just in the chicken wrapped in cellophane, evidence of bruising on the drumsticks that indicate that the chickens were treifas. And he works for the OU. He thinks OU chickens don't have this problem, but he's seen with major kashrut agencies with stellar reputations. He claims that some of them are treifas based on the bruising he's seen. Again, if you have a lot of animals and not cared for properly, you can have treifas. And with adhesions on lungs, there's much more of that than there used to be because they're eating such an unhealthy diet now. Like cows that are slaughtered are much less healthy than they used to be, and you see a lot more treifas, like adhesions on the lungs. All right, let's try to finish. Any other comments? Yeah.
In the case of the cow, the needle that they're doing is to make it healthier, not.
So yeah, it's to make it healthier, but it's a punctured keva, which is Rambam discusses, the Mishnah and Talmud lists certain treifot, certain things that render an animal treif, and Rambam says, and even were we to discover that some of these things aren't actually fatal, and even if we were to discover additional things that might be signs of morbidity in the animal, we have this list, it was determined by Chazal, and these are our treifas. So if you wanted to follow that rule, you would say, no, it's a punctured keva that renders the animal a treifa. We're not going to say that the animal can actually recover from this injury. Okay, let's finish this tshuva, and let's look at the next one, and then we'll pause. And this is according to all halachic opinions. There is no reason to disagree, and one who wishes to be lenient has a great reason to do so, just as most observant Jews are currently lenient about this. That's a little throwaway, right? If you're going to be lenient, you definitely can do that, as indeed most observant Jews are already being lenient on this matter and not insisting on Chalav Yisrael milk. So that's sort of interesting little tip of the hat there to the reality on the ground in the observant community in the 1950s. Even rabbis, and heaven forfend from suggesting they're doing something improper. Okay, so he's permissive, but he's also permissive about something that everyone else was already permissive about at the time. And if nonetheless a particularly pious individual wishes to be strict, there is no prohibition of yuhara doing so. And I also am personally strict, but one who wishes to be lenient is doing something illicit, and he should not be considered as one who takes prohibitions lightly. Okay, you want to be strict and only have chalav Yisrael milk, that's fine. It's permissible to be strict about this. There's a prohibition or a condemnation of something called yuhara, haughtiness, which is sort of, being ostentatiously religious. Okay, maybe, I've seen this applied to, kissing the Torah. Okay, Torah goes around the room and you kiss the Torah, like not with your hand or with your mouth, you kiss the Torah. It's like, okay, that has been condemned, but I've heard that condemned, like as yuhara. That's like you love the Torah so much, you have to kiss it, give me a break, who do you think you are, okay? Another reason I've been told not to do that is that there might be an istiness in the congregation. Istiness is somebody who's a little bit germy and fastidious, who might go, and out of sensitivity for people like that, we also maybe shouldn't kiss the Torah with your mouth. There's a physician in the shul who told me also it's a vector for disease transmission. So I don't know if that's true, but
yeah, sure.
Okay, there's a physician here who confirms that. Okay, but there's no yuhara in insisting on chalav Yisrael milk, and if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you want to have regular milk, no one should feel judged or feel that they're not so from if they have regular milk. An individual who was strict about this and he wonders if he has become forbidden to him in the manner of any pious practice repeated 3 times. This depends on if his intention was to be strict, even if the law were lenient, or if he was strict because of mistaken belief that this was required, right? If you do something on a voluntary basis 3 times, it's like you've taken a vow to adopt that pious practice. And then if you want to undo it, you have to do a tar nadarim. We do this before Rosh Hashanah, many of us, right? We annul these, maybe you do some pious practice 3 times and you don't want to then be bound for that forever. So he says, if somebody who, I always drank chalav Yisrael milk, now that I read your tshuva, Rabbi, can I drink regular milk? And he says, well, it depends why you drank. If you drank chalav Yisrael milk because you thought it was required by halakha, then that was a mistake. And so that's not binding on you. There was no pious practice. That was just a mistaken assumption once you learn the truth that there's nothing wrong with regular milk, so you can go drink regular milk. If, on the other hand, you were only drinking chalav Yisrael milk as an optional practice of piety, then you did it 3 times, then that maybe would be binding on you. You would have to find some way to undo that oath. Your friend, Moshe Feinstein. Okay, any questions before we look at the next last source? Next and last source? So chalav Yisrael milk is milk that a Jew has actually watched the milking. I have a friend who grew up in Rochester, who I think has been hired from time to time to be the Yisrael in chalav, the eponymous Yisrael in chalav Yisrael milk, and I think it meant you sit at the dairy, shed outside the dairy room, and you're sort of around. You're not it's not like a close looking, it's not like a diligent looking, there's a Jew present in the room when the milking is done. Shai.
If you have cameras installed in different places that are being really have people.
It's a good question. I don't, Rabbi Beit wrote an article about the use of closed circuit television for all sorts of halachic contexts. I don't know, I presume he deals with this one. I don't know what he says. The kasher agencies, that they also, if you have a factory under kasher, one of the things that the inspectors look at, especially if they're not there every day, depending on what the factory is, they might only come every 6 months, or depending how sensitive the factory is for kasher purposes, the thing that they're making there. But one of the things they always look at is the records, what you bought, what you sold, everything, all the what you call the invoices, and all the receivables, everything that comes into the factory gets recorded, and that's the kasher inspectors check that, because that's, you're not necessarily going to see something walking around a factory. If you look at the books, you'll see what all the shipments were and what the ingredients were that came in. And so I think we have a holistic attitude towards how you acquire information on what's going on in operation. I think the Chalav Yisrael companies, though, there's actually someone Jewish there. That's my understanding. You have a question?
Is there any difference between milk that has an OU on it and milk that doesn't?
Not in terms of a Jew supervising. The OU will give hashkar. The OU also will look into the additives, the source of the vitamin D, for example. They put vitamin D into most milk, so they'll check on that. But in terms of a Jew present at the milking, there's no difference at all. And in fact, the OU wouldn't even, meaning I think milk is, let's say, milked at various like dairies where they just have cows and big cooled storage tanks, and then the milk is collected in trucks to like central dairies where it's pasteurized and put into bottles. And I think if the OU is supervising, you know, Tuscan milk, whatever, that means they're at the Tuscan factory, they're not at the 300 farms that are all sending milk to that, you know, Tuscan factory. Yeah.
But the question on the other side of it is, if something is not natural, can we assume?
Yes, things not. Yes. I think you can. Milk is something that, based on this tshuva, milk can be consumed without a hechsher. I don't think there's a need to be concerned about the additives, the vitamin additives. Though actually, so there's a story of Rabbi Clapper, who was my teacher when I was in college, and I've stayed in touch with him. He continues to be a teacher of mine. One of his most favorite halachic decisions concerned a local brand of milk, which had kashrut supervision, and they lost the kashrut supervision. And the reason was that there was some shark oil additive in the vitamin D that was being put into the milk, and the kashrut agency took away the hechsher. So this shark derivative was certainly batal b'shishir. It was far less than 1/60th, and it didn't contribute any taste, and so it really shouldn't be a concern. However, we have a rule, ein mevatlin isur lechatchila, that this fact that something non-kosher is nullified in a mixture of 60 times its volume, that is only true if, like, accidentally something non-kosher falls into your pot, whatever it is. But if you can't intentionally put less than 1/60th treif ingredients into your kosher product, that's called mevatlin isur lechatchila. You're not allowed to do that. But here, it wasn't like. But the question is, what about a non-Jewish business intentionally putting this like less than 1/60th ingredient into their kosher product? And the answer to that question may hinge on whether, like, what's lechatchila, what's intentional for a non-Jewish business putting it right. So if they're doing it for the sake of selling it to Jews, that might be a violation of ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. And Rabbi Clapper concluded that the fact that the company was willing to lose their kashrut supervision made the product kosher. Right? They lost their hechsher, but therefore it was kosher because that proved that they didn't care about the kosher consumer, and so they weren't putting this additive in to to nullify isurim that they could then sell to Jews. They were doing it for their own internal reasons, or irrespective of the Jewish consumers they may have, and therefore the milk was still kosher, and he drank it and encouraged others to drink it as well. So it was kosher because it didn't have a hechsher, and this was an irony. So I think milk doesn't need a hechsher. Last few minutes, let's look at this next tshuva. It's an elaboration, but it's the same. This is the 1st of Av, 1954, so this is a few months later. Regarding that which I wrote, that I want to be lenient regarding milk sold by corporations, for they are under government supervision, for there is a strong rationale for this. For knowledge is considered like seeing something, and therefore the case is not within the forbidden category at all. For the rabbis only forbade the case where no Jew sees the milking. And then, Kavod Torato, my honored Torah scholar, sent me a response in the form of a government clerk that the punishment for adulterating milk is only $25 to $100. And there is also the possibility that government inspectors will accept bribes. Okay, so even in 1954, there were cynics. Okay? But this does not negate the knowledge, for there is no incentive to break the law and risk being punished and the need to give bribes. Why should I? It's true, it's only a small fine. It's true, you could always bribe an inspector, but who wants to, it's a service, who wants to go there? And since it is illegal to mix milk in this way, then when he wishes to hire laborers to milk horses and camels and pigs, he will just pay them bribes as well, right? Once you go down this route, the bribes just sort of multiply to keep this knowledge secret, as well as also his own employees, in addition to the government inspectors. So not only is he bribing the inspectors, he also has to bribe all the pig milkers who he has working for him in secret. For even if bribery is common, it's hard to imagine a mass-produced product that depends on bribery, right? Your business model of milking pigs and selling it as milk requires a scale of bribery which is sort of hard to fathom. For the owners will fear doing something illegal with so many other people involved, and the amount of money needed is a great fortune to bribe all of those people for no profit. Right? The circle of illegality sort of expands when you have an operation on this scale. So it's just not not plausible that someone would do this. It only makes sense to be at all concerned in a case where only a small amount of non-kosher milk is to be mixed such that it could be done without any employees knowing, but the small financial gains would not be enough to risk the closure of a large operation that is at risk of losing its license if it is caught multiple times. Right? So maybe you could sneak in a little, like a few gallons of pig milk, and then no one knows. You have to bribe too many people, but for like a few gallons of pig milk, you're going to risk like your whole operation. Why would you do that? And so even though we do not make new umdinot, we don't make new assumptions, the umdinot of being fearful and also the principle that we do not need to be afraid of mixing if it is not profitable to mix are both explicit in the Talmud, and we are authorized to evaluate whether or not it will be profitable to mix. It's not a new umdinot, it's not a new kind of halachic principle that he's deriving, nobody will operate a factory that works in this way. No, this is just the standard application of prior existing, halachic assumptions that there's well-established precedent for. And your suggestion that perhaps we do only need witnesses for kiyum is not tenable for the Mordechai, who concludes that when there are no non-kosher animals in the Gentiles' herd, nonetheless requires the Jew to sit outside, but not to see the milking. This is because the Jew must look to see if the Gentile leaves his herd and brings non-kosher milk, and the Jew must initially look and ascertain that the Gentile did not have non-kosher milk on the premises from the source, as explained the Darchei Moshe, the Bach, and the Shach. Okay? Maybe the Eidim, maybe the witnesses, the Jew seeing, there are two types of witnesses, at least. There are Eidei, what do they call it? Eidei Beror and Eidei Kiyum, okay? There are witnesses who clarify, what happened because they saw it and they witnessed it. And then there are witnesses who solemnize, and they sort of have to be there for like ceremonial purpose. So the witnesses at a wedding, actually, maybe that's what they're there for, right? The Eidei Kiyum, right? You sort of need witnesses even if if you do a wedding in secret, right? If a chatan gives a kala ring without witnesses, even if nobody questions that it happened, like the chatan and kala both want to be married, nobody questions that it happened, they're still not married because you need the witnesses there to solemnize this ceremony, to clarify the seriousness of intention. If there are no witnesses, the kiddushin didn't happen. And so those are Eidei Kiyum. Those are witnesses not to clarify what happened. Those are witnesses just ceremonial witnesses to kind of certify and solemnize the activity. So maybe the witnesses you need for Chalav Yisrael milk are not like the witnesses who see something such that other forms of knowledge would replace them. Maybe they're like ceremonial witnesses, like at a wedding. Maybe that's the type of witnesses you need to see milk being milked, and he disputes that because no, all the sources are very clear and explicit that the witnesses are about ascertaining what the circumstances were under which the milk was derived, and that's basically how he concludes that tshuva. Okay, it's just about 9 o'clock. Thank you so much. We're going to stay with the dairy theme. I believe next week we're doing cheese, right? So cheese and the politics of kashrut. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, thank you so much.
Can we do ice cream too?
What?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Sure. Oh, look, I forgot that the last 2 pages. I said, sorry. Just on your way out. I forgot this was here. I'm sorry. The last 2 pages, you have Moshe Feinstein's letter about voting. I don't know how he wrote this letter because I don't think that he spoke English as well, but it's a letter in his name that he signed, sort of encouraging voting. And you see again this love for America, Hakaras HaTov. Right? We vote, very significant. We vote not because to protect our community. We don't vote out of self-interest. We vote out of gratitude towards America, which means we have to, vote for the benefit of the country. We have to sort of think about the common good. We have to be good citizens. We not vote out of our own self-interest. We vote out of what we think is good for the country. And the last page, you have public trust in government, 1958 to 2010, and you can see from 80, upwards of 70% to less than 20% of Americans who say they trust the government. And so that also, again, impacts how I would think about these halachic topics. Okay, thank you so much.